I've always had this question, and I'm not sure if we've spoken about this before. It's the whole concept behind competition as a driver for innovation, or is it more based on problems and needs, and actually, so now being user focused or customer focused, right? And identifying the problems and trying to solve the problems there. I
Mm.
feel like, things can get lost, priorities can get lost, ethics can get, thrown out the window when competition is that motivator for innovation.
I
Is
think
that
so.
something is that something you've noticed as well?
I
Yeah,
think so. I
yeah.
mean, even in the open banking, open finance sphere, that's still a relatively small share of the overall market. It's about 13-14%. But I mean, the ethos drive behind that was to break open competition, break the monopoly of the traditional incumbent banks and financial services, and get you to share the
Yeah.
data through the APIs and to have,
Open banking, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, to have third parties off you. And has it been successful? Yes, to a certain extent. But again, there's still caveats surrounding this race to open up. Does that then become an opportunity, like I say, to get ahead without the ethical consequences on society pushing ahead? I mean, I made the rather controversial comment on one panel I sat on that said fintech is still predominantly a middle class privilege. And it is, if you look at the figures,
Mm.
the people,
What do
because
you
you've
mean
got,
by that? Sorry.
well, you've got to have
Hmm.
the access, you've got to have a laptop, you've got to be able to pay for broadband connection on a monthly basis. You've got to have the digital skills to understand and navigate. I mean, I don't know if you've looked in the
Yeah.
decentralized finance space, the DeFi, that needs a lot of
Hmm.
skills to understand the technical side of it. That I would say, my opinion, that a lot of people don't have that in the digital divide. So you get this again, literally a divide between those who can have access and benefit from investing and getting the returns on the investment quickly in the DeFi space or the new innovation, and you've got those who to a certain extent don't know it exists, don't know what benefits it could bring them. And there are people
Yeah.
working to sort of level this up and giving free courses on digital skills and breaking the myths around maths or whatever barriers it might be.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's why I made the comment when I was sat on a panel of white middle class educated people that,
Hmm.
none of us have come from a poorer background. We've all come from maybe working lower middle class to upper working class, got educated, and we know about,
Puts you in a
yeah,
puts you in a
we
position
know,
to
we're
talk about that
educated,
more
we're
readily.
aware.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you
Yeah.
think about the channels, if you weren't aware, if you were a single mom on an estate just deciding, do I pay for broadband or do I put food on the table, or I've been a homeless
Yeah.
person, what are the critical barriers to you investing in the DeFi space, for instance? If you start to unpack it, you can see that it's just not equal based on what you know
What's
and who you know, which you could argue has
so
always
what?
been the case in society, right? But again, as
Yeah.
we move towards cashless society, we still have to have the caveat of, okay, if we're moving towards
Does it
cashless
cater to everyone?
society,
Yeah.
we've got to have that transitional period, and we've got to understand that environment of the impact of removing cash as a transaction. When we talk about financial inclusion, people have even stripped it right back to saying it's the right to be able to transact, not just to be able to open a bank account. No, the ability to transact, to buy things, to
Simple
transfer,
as. Yeah.
to do that. Because again, if you make it a condition that it has to be a bank account, they're just becoming part of that system where potentially the algorithms at some point will have some bias against them, which they've already experienced. So that there's lots of questions to still
So
emerging now to
so
be teased up.
yeah. So the question I have for that, which I'm sure you've probably been asked a couple of times. I'm probably thinking about. It's not an easy question as well to answer. How do you sort of how do you mitigate that?
How do you
These
mitigate?
financial how these financial tech companies are just going ahead innovating with technology, but it's more focused on the middle class, isn't it?
It
But the
is.
majority of people, in terms of inclusion, that who need to transact, don't have, are not sensitized well enough to use these technologies. It's probably going to put them in a worse off situation in being able to transact, going towards this paperless economy that we're talking
Yeah.
about. How do we get these big financial organizations to sort of take a step back and be more user focused?
I think it's moving towards that. The trouble is, I use the example of credit scoring. Okay, one of my projects is to
Yeah.
look at explainability of the decision making processes. Right now, that can be a human algorithm. So you and I sit down. We're trained in a bank that this is how we credit score Olby, who wants to
Mm-hmm.
apply for a mortgage. What do we look at?
Mm-hmm.
We look at your income, but we also look at your postcode to see if
Mm.
that's the average income we can predict. We don't really look at
Okay.
your flexible expenditure. We can see what it's historic data. So it might be over the last 3 years, we get your returns and make a sort of
Mm-hmm.
intuitive human judgment that roughly this is what Olby earns as an income on a regular level. Here are some of his fixed
Mm-hmm.
costs, but also based on his postcode, which could be biased. I mean, you might be far out earning your postcode, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
His salary is
Mm-hmm.
probably going to be that based on historic, not current
Mm-hmm.
data. And then you think, how's that fair? and there's many
Mm-hmm.
instances where also people go, well, I went for credit, say, I know I've got X amount of money in the bank. I went to buy one of these buy now, pay later schemes for a sofa or a piece of furniture, a big ticket item, refused credit. Why? And when you trace back, because you see the credit agencies aren't allowed to tell you why you've been refused credit,
Yeah.
because again, maybe the fraudsters would then get that information and defraud the system as to how they calculate this. So you're not allowed to know. But
Mm-hmm.
it turns out one of a case that I know about, applied for credit and they were perfectly credit worthy, but the offer of credit for that day, the target had been reached. So they were turned down for credit because their giving out credit had been reached for that company for that day. But the consequence of
Mm.
it is that person then gets a decline for credit that sits on their credit scoring for 7
Yep.
years.
Yep.
So even though they could have had credit if there'd been just one more credit offer for that day,
Timing. Mm-hmm.
timing.
Mm-hmm.
So the system
Mm-hmm.
is biased and broken. It's noisy. We need to read it, but it's that kind of Einstein thinking around it, is that this is what we've always done. So and then you get generations of people trained on
Making the same mistakes.
this is how
Yes.
you
Make yeah.
do credit scoring. These are the metrics you look at. This is how it works. This is how we get an estimate of what Karen or Obi earn. And then we apply a credit score to it, whether you're credit worthy. Whereas what open banking's done is said, okay, let's base that on live data. So we've got an
Mm-hmm.
end of day account. So whatever you and I have spent today, either online or normal times, coffee shops or whatever, getting lunch, then they would have like an end of day balance. They'd also be able to look and see the regular payment that I'm getting from Newcastle University, paying my salary each month. They'd also see my
Yeah.
fixed costs like mortgage, car payments, electricity, council tax, like that. But they'd also get an insight into my more flexible payments. How much am I traveling? Am I overspending? Am I purchasing lots of shoes or whatever? But it would give
Yeah.
you that real time update on what I'm doing. And then you could say, there's a case where somebody had been paying £1,000 in rent for several years, so £1,000 a month in
Mm-hmm.
rent, applied for a mortgage for £1,000 a month and was refused. And that's
Mm.
because of the way it's historically calculated. Whereas with open banking, they could look and go, oh, they've been paying £1,000 a month out in rent for several years. So they
They should
could
meet the
pay
yeah.
they could pay it in a mortgage. And it's these things
Yeah.
that I always think in systems, that a lot of systems, social systems, financial systems that we've got, once you demand of them, they tend to fail us a lot of the time, and because there's inherent biases. Now, is that all technical? No. Humans are biased. There's a great book out by the famous Daniel Kahneman that's just come out called Noise. So that's a book I would recommend. So it's the flaws in human
Okay.
judgment.
Taking note.
Yeah, flaws in human judgment. So he's like a behavioral psychologist, economist, Nobel winner for his writing. So he wrote Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, which is also good about our reactions as humans. And so now he talks about, and I look at bias in algorithms that underpin machine learning and then aggregate it up to AI. But he talks about, it starts with humans anyway, because we create the programs, the models, and the data set that we're working on. Your audience and everybody will be aware of where there's been cock-ups, for want of a better word, with algorithms like Amazon's famous HR one, hiring software engineers. They fed it on historic data. So it rejected everybody who wasn't male, a software engineer degree, a computer science degree, and of a certain age. It didn't consider anybody else because that's what the model had been trained on the data. What do software engineers look like? Oh, well, we've always hired male, white, educated to a certain level. Right, okay, that's what I need to hire. And these are those things. So back to Kahneman, he said the trouble is that our brains at any one time bias. So we have this inbuilt bias from our education, our ethnicity, our peer group,
environment,
our
100%.
education, like I say, our training in industry. This is how you do credit scoring. So why change it? Because it's always worked. But noisy in terms that we've always got kind of an emotional influence going on. So the great example he has in the book, 2 examples. First one, judges. So they're all trained the same. They all know the law. They've all practiced. They've all experienced in sentencing people. But what he found was, looking over, it's quite funny because I'm a football fan, but basically if their football team lost, like ours did last weekend, then heaven help the person who stood in front of a judge on Monday morning after we missed the penalty shootout, because what they're saying with this noise in their head, the disappointment of England losing, meant that the judge was more severe in his sentencing, irrespective of what he would do. And Kahneman trialed this over a variety of judges, which is inherently human. We can't totally get rid of it. And this is when you're looking at ethics and trying to look at explainable AI, you can't fully explain it. One, because the machine learning engineers can't explain black boxes in full yet at the neural network deep learning level, which then translates in machine learning aggregated up. So if we can't explain it in human terms with accuracy about the cause and the prediction ability, the cause, effect, and prediction models for certainty, then we can't translate it in something humans go, oh, this is how you do it. Now, simpler ones you can. People have started to remove the black box element and make sure that their algorithms are transparent. But older ones, they are just a black box. We don't entirely know how they work.